Welcome to the first episode of World Brain No Experts. Taking the H.G. Wells essay collection as a departure point, this podcast asks the following questions of a range of people. What has been awakened? Rough beast, benevolent angel, boring super appliance? And considering this question, could we be less wrong about AI than those considered to be experts? And why no experts? Is it possible that there really are any experts on this subject right now? Could a few relatively smart outsiders be less wrong about AI, what it is, what changes it's going to make in our lives, than the glory-drunk founders and their whorish enablers, or the terrified doomsayers? Could you and I be any less wrong, for that matter, than H.G. Wells, who in 1938 brought out a collection of essays that imagined a global encyclopedia would bring about a permanent state of world peace? How could you be more wrong than that? And finally, can an unstructured discussion between humans meaningfully enrich our understanding of the boundaries between us and what has been created? So, that's kind of dry because that's just me reading. Would you pipe up? I don't know. I mean, you don't have to laugh on cue or anything, but
I mean, so many different things are coming into my mind, but honestly, the first thing that came up was I went through all my parents' papers, about a year ago, and I just desperately grabbed a whole bunch of things that, were certainly going to disappear into the fires and into the fires of oblivion. And the other day, I opened a box and I pulled out a sheaf of handwritten characters, and I didn't know if it was Hebrew or Yiddish, but it's written in one of those Hebrew lettering things, a handwritten document, and it's like 6 pages long, and completely indecipherable, and I would have had no way of actually accessing this information.
Except
I just whipped out my phone and I took a picture of each page. And then I proceeded to fight with this machine that wanted to ask me lots of questions, and identified it as like Soviet Yiddish for a while.
Wow.
Because it had lacked punctuation, and then corrected itself a whole bunch of times, and then I fought with it over and over again because I wanted it to give me a PDF. And it just suddenly decided, no, I'm not going to send you a PDF. I'm just going to tell you that I'm about to send you a PDF. Over and over, and you don't have to do anything else. I'm going to send it to you now. Oh, well, actually, I didn't really mean that, because let me ask you 15 questions about how you'd like me to format it, and then I'll send it to you. And then when I answered all the questions, then it didn't send it to me anyway. Until finally I just said, email it to me. And that was the magic word. And it created a perfectly formatted dual language document with the Yiddish on one side and the English on the other. And what was
it a PDF? Because to me, PDF is the universe's way of saying, the internet's way of saying you.
So yes, it sent me a cute note. And what it was what is it? It's a little bit of a journal entry, or maybe just almost like a manifesto written by my grandfather in 1931. So, really kind of it really made me think a lot about that H.G. Wells moment, because what he's saying is, in a moment where you can't really believe what's in the newspapers anymore because everything is conflicting, and everything is sort of corrupted, and it really seems like the worst impulses of humanity are about to take over. And this is 1931, as he sits in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, with the majority of his family, in fact, all of his family, still in Poland.
Okay.
And he has not yet realized that pretty soon he will not be able to save them. And so, it's really 10 years later, that they then die. But and they all disappeared into either concentration camps or bombings, or A whole contingent of them sort of just vanished from the face of the earth, and we don't know what happened to them. Um, but it really did make me think of that like a moment when things seem normal, but you don't feel normal at all. And you still get up, you feed yourself, you go to work, you exist, and yet um, everything feels upside down, topsy turvy. And
Like maybe things feel normal, but they don't sound like this. Sounds like what is happening, right?
yeah, I mean that
Like we are, like the situation we're in now.
potentially, yeah. So you know, this whole debate about no experts allowed, even, right?
Well, I
So
took the
what
allowed
came?
away, but yeah, no experts.
Okay, sorry. Well,
It's okay.
no experts are no. I think that's right because no experts exist, and one of the things that perhaps you and I don't fully agree on is one of the reasons why no experts exist is that very soon the experts will not be people. And because we're really going to be contending with at least machines that can not just retain information, because machines have very good memory.
Hmm.
They have quick access to memory in ways that we
Sure,
don't. The human brain is marvelous and magnificent, but it
but
doesn't
it's
certain
wet and
things.
sloppy.
It's very, very wet and sloppy, and it also evolved in very, very sloppy ways.
Hmm. Sure.
Um, and so pretty soon we're going to be able to interact and contend with machines that can do a lot of that wet and sloppy simulation
Hmm.
and also access all the information that we've ever fed to it and then potentially go further. So that's where we start arguing or we start discussing is, well,
Right.
what's there? Like what are you
Right.
contending with, and why would you even,
How and why and what is it? All that, all the
and
W's,
and
right?
is that an expert?
Okay.
And
That was a good way to move it around because yeah, instead of just saying I accept your premise and I understand it, you're saying, well, define expert. What do you mean by expert? Let's make that mean something different. Good.
well, and
Okay.
but
I like that.
this is what we've been discussing in
No,
our
so
genteel ways.
honestly, sometimes we're playing checkers and sometimes one of us is playing checkers and the other one is playing Go. And then sometimes then it becomes chess. I mean, it's crazy. Well, so I like that. So here's what I want to say. I'm glad you brought that up, that note, because I don't know if that's part of your translation work for that book or if it's just something you found.
That's another part of my family. The book is my father's uncle, and
Yeah.
this one is my
Right.
grandfather, who I
Okay.
never knew,
Okay.
never met.
Okay. So, but so this comes to the, I mean, it hints at the part about assertions and arguments, right? All the things that I boldly several months ago started saying AI can't do and it can't be.
Yeah.
And the ones that I think for mostly what you were saying was, well, I've tried it and it can do some of this stuff in a weird way. And also it can be some of these things that you may be saying it's not, right? I mean, I want to leave it there for a minute because I want to introduce some other ideas if you don't mind. So I think and I mentioned this to you last week, but I think that one of the ways to set this up, instead of just saying Matt is a bigot, he's a bio bigot, and he says that AI can't be this ever, and he can't do this ever, and I want to kind of take a little bit to talk about these splits that you and I were talking about last week. So, and feel free to interrupt me or rabbit hole on this, but I think our population splits off at various times. It's just that's a thing that happens all the time. But the two that I think that are reminding me of this situation we're in right now, where it's kind of like, are people jumping on the AI bandwagon, at least learning how to use it because they're afraid that it's the arc, and if you don't play with it, then it'll leave you behind. You'll be, under a bridge shivering. Um, the split I was thinking about was people who, like you said, quoting the Manchurian Candidate, people who walk into the room and turn the TV off or the radio off, or people who walk into the room and the first thing they do is turn the radio on or the TV on. And I wanted to tell a quick story about me having ambient NPR on in the 90s, okay? And I don't remember if I told you this story this last time or not, but this is the Michael Blangditch story, okay? And I changed his name. In the 90s, I lived in Chicago, really close to Wrigley Field for a while. And I set my alarm to a radio station. It was this new thing, this new phenomenon that, and Chicago was an early adopter of this. It was National Public Radio. It was WBEZ. And it was also during the reporting on the war, the unpronounceable war, the Bosnian War, right? And so, yeah, Herzegovina, right? So, the alarm clock would turn on, and you'd hear, this thing that I just, in my mind, is, the Bosnian slaughter of the weaponized sexual assault of the mass graves of the NATO ineffectuality. It was just horrible, indiscernible catalog of an endless, like a terrifying carbon molecule, that just chains on forever, of all this incomprehensible devastation and tragedy. And at that time, I had worked at the financial exchanges downtown, and at one point I knew a guy through the 12-step program named Michael Blandich, and I trained him because I taught market reporters, as you know, and so he was somebody I got to know, and I sponsored him for a little while. And he told me a lot of crazy stories. He was a big barrel-chested dude who said he used to be a Marine. And he told me these really disgusting stories about getting oral sex under the table while they were playing poker, when they were in somewhere in the global war on terror. I don't know where it was. How much coke he used to buy on payday in the men's room in various exchanges, and how, every time, now that he was trying to be sober, every time he got paid, he would go by the men's room and he would have a physical reaction. And so he was a really intense guy, but he was one of those people, and you've probably run into people like this, or maybe you've been one of these people, where you meet somebody, you hear a bunch of stories from them, and then 3 months later you go, wait a second, that can't all have possibly been true.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think you've been that person, and you've also run across that person, right? So, he calls in sick to work one day and tells me that he's strapped down to a gurney in the ER because he flipped out, overdosing or something like that. And then nothing. I hear that he's gone into a 21-day treatment program on the dime of the exchange he worked at. And he stopped showing up. So I don't hear anything from him. But meanwhile, at that time, like after this period when I don't hear from him anymore, he's gone, I kind of had that moment of like, oh, okay, I'm a dupe. I believed everything he said. I'm stupid. Right. But also it was mixed with like, oh, this guy's he's kind of spooky. Like, I don't want to, if somebody would lie about all those things, then that's not necessarily a trustworthy person. So my dukes are up a little bit. And then he calls me a couple months later, and he says, hey, want to grab some coffee? And I'm like, not really. I'm really busy, which was a lie. I was between jobs. But I was like, I kind of just didn't want to hear any more of his freakish stories. So he said, look, it's too bad I can't see you. I just wanted you to, I wanted to wish you the best. I'm leaving town. Oh, where are you going? He was heading off to Bosnia to report, to be a journalist for NPR. And I'm like, and I'm thinking with my filter of everything Michael says is bullshit, thinking, yeah, well, hey, good luck, keep your head down. But internally, I'm like, and then I forget all about it. And my alarm goes off a couple months later, and I hear that litany of the murder, of the torture, of the rape, of the blah, blah. This is Michael Blandich from NPR in Bosnia. And I'm like, what the hell? So I tell you that story because it's really about information leaking in, and how you try to discern false from true, and how hard it is, right? What you asked me when I talked to you about this last week, about this sort of thing about people leaving their radios or TVs on or not, and how much of a change that makes in populations, people who have exposed to NPR, or people who are exposed to Fox, for instance, or people who just read. You said the question is AI as big as that change, right? And the other change that I was mentioning, and I don't want to go into that, I don't have a big story about this one, but people who are able to work from home since the pandemic, right? And I think that split off people in a big way, because people who are able to work from home they have a whole set of choices that people who have to show up in person always don't have. So now I want you to talk to me about how you think the size or the magnitude of this AI thing compares to changes like that.
So I'm not quite sure which of those changes you mean. So, for example, do you mean the arrival of television? Um, or are you talking about like the moment everyone started listening to what? NPR, the rise of Fox News.
No, that's a good question. So I'm asking you to compare things that aren't really the same size at all. So well, let's
Yeah,
take being able to work from home after the pandemic, because even
yeah,
though these are related things, right?
right,
The information stream from propaganda from TV and radio has been a thing for a long, long time,
right.
but it does kind of bifurcate people in a way or
Yeah.
separates the people out. But I think the work from home one is a snap in time where we can say everything was different for some people and everything was absolutely the same for other people, right?
You've raised several important questions. First of which is, did everything that Henry Miller, Charles Bukowski, and Milan Kundera write, was that all bullshit, right? Was that all lies, right? So those are the three writers that I came up with immediately
Good
like
God.
who made careers out of their endless conquest, right?
Okay.
Like all the women and
Okay.
in all the ways in which they sort of debase themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't help but just throwing that in because I just reread The Unbearable Lightness of Being, which is an incredible philosophical work that
Mm-hmm.
sort of like sucks you into its own point of view and doesn't
Mm-hmm.
let you go.
Right.
Um, so for me, that is a relevant statement because before I answer the question of magnitude,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
do think that AI is something that sucks you into its point of view and its way of
Mm-hmm.
thinking
Okay.
and doesn't seem likely to let go. So in terms of how big is this,
Yeah.
um, let me answer in a slightly roundabout way, which
Okay.
is one of the big quandaries and conundrums around what AI is doing right now is it's eliminating veracity in media, meaning anything written, um, anything, any still image, any video
Sure.
image of any kind
Could be a fake.
is now right fake. And I sort of came full circle with that in the sense that um, up until about 100 years ago, we had no way of capturing or recording. We had certainly no way of capturing a moving image. Uh, Photography was around a little bit longer, and yes, we can tack on 20 years with even with film. But with photography, it's more like 150 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly something that you could never do before was now captured as real,
Sure.
real, right? So the idea of the stuff as evidence, for example, that it would
Yeah.
be real, and yes, it could be doctored. The Soviets were the ones who, figured out, doctoring of images, early on to
But
try to
people always
change.
wanted to do it. We
They
used to
always
have a
wanted to
book
try to do it.
about fairies that somebody had made
Love that
beautiful little
book.
drawings on. It was a beautiful book, but
Love
it
that.
was it really proclaimed to be proof that fairies
Right,
existed, and
right.
that's what
And
publishing is all about, right?
and for sure, and some of the first uses of photography was to try to capture images of ghosts. And
Yes.
actually, mortuary photography was one of the really big things that was done. Like that great book, Wisconsin Death Trip, which
Oh
is
my
such a
God. Yes.
crazy, creepy,
Absolutely.
weird book. And that was a
Yep.
cultural thing.
Hmm.
Another one that photography did, which was, the American obsession with lynching and white people showing up at lynchings, and
Yep.
then they would like take these postcards of themselves
Well, right.
at the
There's the great line
lynchings.
in the Dylan song. They're selling postcards of the hanging.
Yeah, and there was a
Yeah.
moment where the U.S. Post Office actually banned the mailing of lynching postcards unless you put them in an envelope. Because there's this huge debate over that time. So what the way I'm thinking about this is all of that idea as something real was always a fallacy,
Right.
and we've also got 100,000 years of human evolution in which this didn't exist, and about
Right.
150 years in which it did just briefly. And now
Right.
we're
So,
back to something.
so the supposedly trustworthy testimony of maybe eyewitnesses and graven images are supposed to lend
Right.
credence to assertions, stories, truth claims about the world, and they've always been contingent as hell. And there was this brief, weird period where everybody was sort of believing that, like, well, there's a photograph from the moon landing, which proves that it's real.
Yep.
Oh, really?
And
There are a lot of people who just don't take that as evidence. Don't care. Don't
right,
care. Right. So,
right.
so are we saying that AI has undermined the the utility of images and recordings and stuff? And if that's a momentary state anyway, that those things had at some point pride a place of like being able to be proof for some legal term or some belief about the universe, and now that's poof, that's disappeared,
Right.
then maybe we lost a momentary state of traction about evidence, but we never had it. It's never existed in human
Yeah.
history anyway,
So
right?
for
So
me,
that's one thing.
we
Does that
didn't
make a
lose.
big does that make a big disaster or not?
Well, but so that's maybe what we lost. I don't think of that as disaster. And also, I'm thinking about what we gained. So, my original
What did we
career
gain,
and
Yuri? Because I don't know
training.
what could we
Well,
possibly have gained?
I'm a photographer, right? I love photography. I love the discipline, and it's a set of tools, and it's a set of creative tools. Now, to a painter in 1850 or an illustrator in 1860 or whatever, it was a desecration. It was, this sort of mechanical, um, artificial, soulless, corrupting force. And because it took away the true nature of human expression, and you really couldn't do anything with it except just take horrible snapshots. Now, the fact is that yes, the world was then flooded with horrible snapshots, and is still there and more than ever. But it's also an incredible visual medium that
Hmm.
that came out of this, and certainly a tool for artists among lots and lots of other people.
Sure.
And it democratized the ability to capture your likeness.
Hmm.
Um, that did not exist before then. Only wealthy people got to capture their likeness.
Right.
Um,
And the painters were free to go off and do other crazy
yeah,
things.
and they went off and did other stuff. So the fact that you've now got video AI tools, for example, that allow you to build movies, environments that actually even create fake environments that are sort of coming out of your own imagination. To me, it's a
Sure.
creative tool, and I'm very excited about it. I think it's beautiful. Same with any kind of an idea where you can work with a machine, because that's what photography is. You're working with the limitations of
Hmm.
a machine
Sure.
to come up with something that's unexpected and that you can't fully control. Well, that's a perfect description of where AI is right now. Now,
Hmm.
it is also strikingly true that AI gets more and more and more accurate, meaning if you feed it the right information, we're getting a lot closer to it being able to give you an image or a video that you
Hmm.
could no longer distinguish between something that was captured in, quote, the real way, which is not really real,
Hmm.
but the more mechanical way, versus the way that has an intermediary that's taking some of your ideas and also mashing up lots and lots of other ideas that have been fed into these massive systems and then producing something, right?
Okay. So
So
that thing
I'm
though.
not
Wait. So
disturbed by any of that.
okay,
I
good.
think
But
that
let me insert something then. So if we're saying then that um what we have now is a bigger set of tools for image manipulation, then the only way, because they're just because you can't visually discern whether something was taken as a photograph or not based on the richness of the image or the accuracy of the representation doesn't mean you can't say, I know that dude never wore that suit at a 1980s car lot, and I also
mm,
know that he cannot
yeah,
fly. So you have to
yeah.
you have to have your bullshit detector on anyway, right?
Oh,
And I know if he said my name, it
absolutely.
would never sound that way, right?
Right.
So you know,
Well, you've democratized that ability to put somebody in a suit they could never wear and to make them fly. Because
yeah,
before, only Hollywood and movie
yep,
makers could do that, or
yep,
animators. But
right,
now any idiot can basically just whatever you can think up to
hmm,
tell it to do, it will do within limits, right? Because there are all sorts of
right,
things that, given full reign, humans would ask these images to do. Um,
right,
and then so you get into there's a lot of censorship going on. There's a lot of
hmm,
what's acceptable and what's not.
sure,
And then of course there are all these companies that have sprouted up that will do allow you to do anything. Um,
Right. And so one thing that happened during this brief period where there were photographic images and phonographic recordings that people could traffic around and replicate and sell was it did become an intellectual property ownership and sales machine and distribution
mhm.
machine that worked really well for a little while and gave a lot of people the right to buy a lot of cocaine or whatever and buy houses
Right,
and
right,
get facial surgery before anyone else could. And now it's the internet itself has turned around and made things free, and so it made it kind of impossible to own things in the same way. And then this
mhm,
AI does what it does is this logical extension of taking ownership away, which is you can't even own the image. AI doesn't own the images that it's used to create, even, right? So
right,
it's kind of
right,
odd. I mean, it
right,
puts intellectual property ownership or monetization in a really weird place.
right. So let me answer your question now. How big is this?
Yeah. Okay.
Um, for me, it's it's as big as the biggest things that have ever existed and potentially bigger. So meaning um, the invention of language, um, the invention of written language,
Hmm.
um, the development of settled agriculture. Um, yes, things like the Industrial Revolution, but anything smaller than that does, and potentially this is the biggest thing that humanity has yet done. That's how I see it. So
Okay.
anything like, I don't know, like those other things, like, media outlets, or what, something that influences our politics. Um, you and I have debated, and one of the things that you've said over and over, and I don't want to take it from you because I want to hear what you have to say about this, which is, a lot of the things that we're arguing about, the ills have already existed way before AI.
Hmm.
AI does not
Sure.
contribute, and I've come to agree with you that a lot of the corruptions of society, of corporate America, of the corruption of climate, the of the degradation of politics,
Concentration of
the
wealth into very few people's hands, right?
I completely agree. AI doesn't really add to any of that. It all existed before, and
Yeah.
yes, it could exaggerate some of those things.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
in my mind, what AI could do is could take that whole cart. Things like, we all work our asses off all of our lives and save and spend money at shitty companies, and then we retire and we die, and we use, this money that we've spent our whole lives saving, that whole setup.
Yeah.
I think there's a very good likelihood that AI inadvertently, or maybe on purpose, could upturn that stuff. So I'm not disagreeing with you that things are corrupt and that things are corrupted, but I think you and I possibly disagree that this thing could actually knock over, like destabilize all of that.
Well, okay. Right. So
Destabilize
no, we totally
everything
agree.
that's corrupt.
Then we totally agree that destabilization is the inevitable result of the proliferation of AI. There's no doubt about that to me. And it's sort of like when you light something on fire, you don't know how much of it's going to burn. You don't know whether it's
Hmm.
going to create smoke, or whether it's going to make the whole forest floor be riddled with new sprouts 6 months later, because there's some kinds of tree seeds that can only sprout when they've been exposed to a certain temperature of fire.
Hmm.
And that's something I don't even
Hmm.
remember what kind of tree that is, but that's something I've learned peripherally just from people in fire. So, um, destabilization, absolutely. What we started with, though, when we started talking about this about, I don't know, a year ago, was I started because I was definitely on the sidelines. I had not done any things with AI. I had not used it. I had not studied about it. I didn't know anything about it except for, ugh, I had a general distaste for it, right? And so I went around saying, well, there are things it can't do. It can't be. And there are things it
Hmm.
will never do. It can't say why, for instance, right? And it can't be, in other words, it can't be meaningfully at cause for any concerted actions. It can certainly take ideas from somewhere else and take commands from somewhere else and execute them in some certain way, for sure. And
Hmm.
and oh, and I know that you've said things like, well, we're sort of AI in a way because we just spit out language that we already learned, and in a certain way we're sort of like machines because we just have to follow our biology. But you know, AI, no matter what it is, no matter what it consists of, it's code running on machines that are physically made by people, right? There are ways it can't be. There are things that it can't be, and there are things that it cannot do, and I think it's not really meaningful to say, well, it can't do it yet, but it'll be able to do it later. And one of the things we definitely have disagreed on is whether faking something so that you could fool someone is meaningful in the least bit with regard to like having created something. In other words, if I can write some code that will convince you that that code is a real person, and I fool you, to me that doesn't change the reality of whether the code is code or the code is a person.
Right. So let's back up just a little bit,
Sure.
because I love how we're paraphrasing each other's answers and questions and
And
answers.
then beating the fuck.
So
yeah. If we don't get lost in this, then we're not really doing our job.
But I don't think we're getting lost. I think we've gone right to the heart of it, which is, it's not that I think that people are sort of like AI. It's that I think people are actually robots that are pre-programmed computers
living in a simulation
that contain very, very complex code. And every time I say this, you think it's funny, but this is exactly what we are. We are written codes that are written in DNA. And by the way, your
we're
DNA,
Clockwork Orange.
No,
that was his argument. Was orangutan with this is a clockwork? A person is just a robot, right? That's the question that book, that horrible piece of shit book.
We're a set of instructions to replicate DNA, which, by the way, the blade of grass and you and I is only slightly different. So basically, we live on a planet of all kinds of different versions of more or less the same life form, whose design is basically to replicate DNA. And I think it's probably very likely that DNA didn't even or originate here on this planet, that it's quite possible that it came from somewhere else. Now, not only that, but our belief systems are predetermined to a great extent, and our ability to think independently and what we do and why we do is to a great extent this self-delusion around freedom of thought, self-determination, individuality, and depending on your culture and your background, you might think more or less of that. And so I think it deserves some time and energy to explain why I actually have come, number one, to think of you, yes, truly as a bio-bigot in that way, but also as actually more religious than I am, because than I thought you were, and then in some ways more religious than I am, because you're willing to stand by this belief, this deeply held belief that you have around the biological dominance of humanity. Whereas I'm much more willing to say that there's a whole set of processes that are involved in what causes you to act and to say things and to form language, and that it's not that when you talk to an AI, it can fool you. It's just that whether or not it sees itself in any way, it can still deliver information, and very, very useful information. And I'm firmly convinced that it's way smarter than you or I right now, not in the future. It's way smarter than you or I in any way in which we measure intelligence. Now, is it feeling in the same way you or I? Well, then there's a great debate. And I don't think it ever...
I do want to pick one nit, though.
Yeah, please.
When you said biological dominance, that implies that I'm saying human beings are special and they shall never be dethroned, and we matter. Like, so dominance is not the same as saying, like, AI will be able to... It's creating a system that, if you use the word smarter, which it's kind of a meaningless, I mean, it's kind of a really questionable word, but if you say ability to perform a lot of tasks with language in a really fast, really quickly and really effectively, then certainly the ability to do those things is by AI is going to be outrun by humans. Will be outrun by we can't. Well, there's a bunch of stuff we can't do, but that doesn't mean so dominance isn't important to me. What I was trying to say was that humanity is special in a way, and the human and any biological entity this is where my bio-bigotry kind of
Mm.
comes from, is any biological entity, especially humans, are not the same as an AI agent that might fool people temporarily to think that it is.
But
I'm
eventually,
saying that just if what you say is if AI can become smarter than us,
right.
then it somehow is us or better. It's like it's just not the same.
But why is it important that it fools anybody? Who cares if it
Well,
fools
I
you,
don't
right?
know.
I think we're,
I don't know
but
why I
I
keep
think
hearing
we're,
you say, "Well, if I did that, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference." Like, yeah, but that's meaningless. I don't care.
but I'm actually not really interested in that anymore. I mean, that's
Oh,
sort of what
we've
I was
moved
trying to
on.
say
Okay.
about this whole idea of veracity, right? So yes, I was stuck in that loop too of,
Okay.
oh wow, it's like we're losing the ability of knowing what's real. And I think at a certain point I realized that, wait, that's not what's interesting here. What's interesting is how much, so there's the ability to do, and then there's the ability to know.
Hmm.
And if you or I is able to talk to something
Hmm.
that actually knows more about everything than any one
Hmm.
human being is
Right.
capable of knowing, and that you and I can actually talk to that thing, whatever that thing is,
Uh-huh.
at any given time. And in fact, every human on the planet, or at least any human with a computer on the planet, now
Hmm.
has the ability to have that thing sitting at their ear, at their shoulder.
Hmm.
Number one, what does that do to us?
Hmm.
And then number two, what happens when that thing starts to be able to interact with its own knowledge, right? So yes, that does fall in the category of what does not yet exist very much, although I would say arguably it does to some extent. But what happens when that thing starts to be able to interact with what it already knows?
Well, okay, and
What happens?
those are interesting questions, but I'm that doesn't answer the question of what I say it can't do or can't be, because and this is something that happens quite often is that I set up a proposition that can be proven or not, and
Mm.
you change the terms sometimes, and it's like
Well,
it's kind of
but
crazy making.
let's go to why then. Let's just go to that
Okay,
question of
okay,
it can never say why.
yes,
Now, if you've got a tool that's designed to solve scientific problems,
hmm, which we weren't, by the way.
well, but
We aren't that tool.
that
We
if
were not
you don't,
designed to solve scientific problems. It's a novelty.
well, that's one of the most spectacular things that we have done.
I
It's
like the
why
fact that
we're
we can do it. No, I
well,
like the fact that we can do it, but it's
it's
not
what
why we were
this
designed.
well it so on the most basic level, all we were really designed to do was reproduce.
I don't know.
What else were we designed for?
Okay.
I mean, I don't think we were designed for anything personally, but if you
Well,
have an idea of what
I will
for,
tell you what I think, because
okay.
I personally don't think it's eat, pray, love, or kill. I don't
Oh
think
darn.
we were just right. I don't think it was that. I think that we were designed, if you can call it that, to experience consciousness. Okay. And that doesn't
Oh
mean no words. It doesn't mean solve problems. And it doesn't even mean communicate with each other and compare things or have your arguments. It means the experience of being alive is, and we've talked about this a little bit before,
yeah, yeah.
the experience of being alive, absolutely being alive, is so huge. It's such a big deal in my mind. It's a cornerstone of my bio-bigotry. Okay. And it it's way deeper than language. It's way
So
deeper than the senses.
can you
It's
just
not. So go
refine
ahead.
that a little bit? So there's the experience of being alive, but then there's the awareness of being alive.
Yes.
Do you mean both?
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Okay,
Yeah. But talking about it is after that. It's outside of that. Is on top. Like it
right.
isn't on it. It's a sprinkle on top.
And that's not
And so,
exclusively human, right?
well, no.
That
But I
could
mean,
be
but I mean, the fact that we know that AI is many things, right? It's not just GPT. It's not just large language models. It's a bunch of other stuff. But when you ask, when you start tinkering around with the idea of, okay, well, there's a bunch of code, and that code is doing interesting things, and part of what it's doing is processing language in interesting ways, right? That seems to run loops around us really fast, and being able to speak a bunch of different languages and infer a bunch of things and hold a bunch of content like a bunch of concepts at once and make decisions based on them in a way that we can't gather that many threads, right? We can't hold 500 precepts in our head and then boom, 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 process them and then go, here are my 3 possibilities for this. I wrote 400 pages while you were sitting there. Processing language fast, great. But the whole conversation about what makes a person or why a person is there, I think, I've been thinking about the apostles, the books of the New Testament, because John was all about the word and logos and the Greek idea of, the idea, the word, the thought form that has a special relationship with reality, with the way reality is instantiated from the Godhead or whatever. And then he attributes that to the Christ, right? He says, well, Jesus is the Word of God in that sense. I believe that fascination with language is a marvelous, marvelous thing for humans to get excited about. I love poetry. I love words. I love drama. I love rhyming, slang. I love lyrics. I love, all that stuff. But I don't believe that is the fundamental part of what makes us as humans, what makes us exist. And so processing language or making decisions or, inferring things or doing science or calculating things or even rotating pictures or calculating things, those are really nifty things for a tool to do. And for a tool set to do it and have a conversation with itself about the 3D things, or, hey, I found a lot of weird adverse events in this big pile of data that nobody ever found before. That's all fantastic. But I don't believe this is one of those things about what I think AI can't do.
No, I get it.
I don't think it can't be. I don't think it can be in the sense of experiencing aliveness the way somebody who has a lifespan can do.
So, totally agree with that. I'm curious about where you think Darwin fits into this, or the theory of evolution fits into this, because there's certain amazing things about how Darwin came up with what he did. First of all, an aristocrat scientist, right? So somebody with no real compulsion to work, but sort of doing this as a hobby, and quite a religious person in a very traditional Christian sense. And then he's studying wasps.
Right.
And what's so stunning to him about what these wasps do is their unbelievable cruelty. Now, he's talking in human values, right?
Yeah, that's
he's
right.
just blown away by how diabolically evil these things are.
Yeah.
And
I saw one rip a honeybee in half one time. I'm like, holy
and they like laying eggs inside, and the larvae eat their way out, and they're turning the insect into a zombie and all this stuff. And it really caused him to question, his idea of morality, of God. And it didn't make him an atheist, but it did really cause him, this sort of standard idea of good and evil and why we exist and what we are. And it caused him to move towards this idea, which is we are the product of a vicious battle for survival.
Bred in tooth and claw and so on, right? I know that's not a quote from him. Well, here, let me just set the stage for you. The amount I know, the amount I don't know about Darwin could fill the oceans. I know about as much about Darwin. Honestly, I've just not read his stuff, and he's one of those people I need to read everything he wrote, because I've heard enough about him. I'm like, oh God, I have to read everything. I know more about winemaking. I know nothing about winemaking. So I'm excited that you brought Darwin to the party here. I do want to ask if from what you know, because I don't know, and maybe AI knows, how much Darwin knew about the Epicureans, because there is in Rerum Natura, there is a reference to 2 things that I think that's 2,500 years ago that were blindingly modern. One of them was atoms and space. That's what matter is made up of. Atoms and space.
Beautiful.
Like, holy shit. And then the other one was some idea of natural selection, some idea of speciation, and some idea of and I don't know if you're familiar with this, but I know that Jefferson, for instance, Thomas Jefferson knew enough of the Epicureans to put his contribution to the Bill of Rights was life liberty, and the pursuit of pleasure.
Oh,
That was
love it.
the original draft,
That
because
makes
the
sense.
Epicureans were about, hey, if it feels good, do it. And that's a really simplistic, stupid way to express what they did. But they
Hmm.
basically, in one way of saying that is, you will know whether you're doing right or not because you will sense it. And it is pleasurable to do the right thing, and it is disgusting to do the wrong thing. And so it's easily perverted into do whatever you want and smoke a bowl and fuck people. That's not the point. The point was there was something about our internal experience that guides us toward what
Hmm.
we think is right in a sensual way almost. But I
Right.
don't know if, I mean, so in other words, I know there were people who were, over the years, over the decades and centuries, who have kept contact with that poem, with the contents of that poem, the ideas of the Epicurists. Um, and I think Franklin was not a Christian. He was some other thing, right? He had other ideas. He was mostly talking about wisdom. A wise man will do this, an unwise man will do that. Be like the wise man, right? Um, but I don't know if, from what you know about Darwin, I'm going to go find out now, whether he was steeped in that or whether it just kind of happened that he started thinking about
Right.
evolution in that respect. Do you
So,
know?
well, first I have to go into a sidebar, which is,
Yes, please do.
hello, audience. Welcome to the Yuri and Matt show, where over intellectualized people argue about whether or not they believe in spirituality. So I love it because, like, you are such a wealth of
I
knowledge.
especially specialize in things I don't know shit
I
about.
love it.
That's where I can really
So
get going.
I, I have a layperson's understanding of evolution. I probably should not have even used the name Darwin, but I think I have a reasonably good understanding of,
Okay.
from a educated person's popular science point of view of
Okay.
evolutionary mechanisms, right? So
Okay.
I've read a lot of articles, for example, on how the hormonal system functions in an evolutionary way. So, I
Okay.
mean, so for certain things like love and attraction, um, fear, hatred, envy, desire, things that humans have this unique ability of turning into words, right? So
Sure.
this is where I start to get a little uncomfortable with your idea of like, you know, experience takes the top of the pyramid, and that other things like language are sort of further down because what humans are again uniquely able to do is build these systemic structures on which you can name and teach and repeat and make the understanding of these things more and more and more intricate to the point where you can actually build things, right? I don't necessarily think that the greatest achievement of humanity is to be able to build things, but they have in amazing ways figured out how to harness nature
Okay, but so
and
what I like about what you're saying
predictably
is you're
change
talking about how
things.
special people are, how special humans are, and how they have
Yeah,
special
oh
gifts.
God,
And
yes.
that's to me funny
Humans.
because go humans, go, people are wonderful. People are amazing.
I never said
But
they're one. I think
I
humans
know,
are.
just wait, wait,
The
wait.
world would
So
be better. Yeah, go ahead.
no, don't even go there yet. But it is like we both have a model of what makes humans specifically themselves, right? What is it that makes people people, right? From what are their abilities? What are the things that set them apart from other
Hmm.
life forms and whatnot? And a lot of yours seem to be about linguistics and higher cerebral functions that involve like tool use, language, and so on. And I am totally that's how I live. I make money by
Hmm.
talking to people about with words, and I'm a word cell. I'm not a shaper shader. You know what I mean? I talk to people about words, and I still get paid somehow to do taxonomy, which is crazy. Um, but I have come into in the past 10 years or so, 15 years, some appreciation of another aspect of human existence, which I feel pretty strongly about, and which I feel really does set us apart from, um, well, understanding it this way um, gives you an ability to appreciate what is the experience of being a person. And I'm not saying, I'm not talking about understanding. I'm not talking about cogitating about it. Actually, that's what makes it fishy to talk about.
Hmm.
But that part, I feel like maybe it's maybe it's an iceberg. Maybe it's the tip of the iceberg is language and tool use, and underneath it is all this other stuff I'm talking about, which
Hmm.
also makes it hard to do if you picture it that way. Hard to describe, hard to differentiate. But that's a thing that I firmly believe without biology, without a lifespan, without knowing you're going to die, without
Hmm.
having that molecular drive or that cellular drive to stay alive, to use energy, to procure resources, and to just take it in like, hey, I'm alive. To pay attention to the fact that you're alive. That, to me, foregrounding that gives me a new appreciation or a different perspective on why anybody's here. And it requires, in a way, a lot less. Like, the purpose of being alive is to be alive. That's different than purpose of being alive is to help other people or to solve problems or get to the top of the heap or whatever. And this brings me back to Heidegger, another person that I know almost nothing about, right? Because I don't read German and I'm not a philosopher. I don't know shit. But I know his utterance that always got my attention, just like Sapir-Whorf, all ideas
Hmm.
that exist in language, which I also don't know much about, but I
Hmm.
like.
Hmm.
But when Heidegger said, or was quoted as saying, language is the house of being,
One of my
I
favorite
thought about that
quotes.
for a long time. It's a beautiful thing to say, and it's,
Hmm.
for me, completely insane. It's like saying birds are the ocean. They are no. So I believe that language is the house of language, and being is the house of being, and we, like the gorilla who
Well,
carefully peels the banana and throws the banana when he eats the peel, we are the people who totally disregard
but
we
hang on.
disregard the experience of being in this horrible way
So, but let's
in
back
our
up a
culture,
second.
especially. Yeah.
Can you explain to me, but I think it would be helpful for everyone, if you explain what you think Heidegger meant by that statement.
Well, here's what I think he meant, because I don't
Hmm.
know. I think he meant that um, I can apprehend what matters about about really being aware of who you are by appreciating the way it's described linguistically, the way it's expressed linguistically. That's what I think he meant. I don't know. That's what I think he meant.
I mean, I've used that quote many, many, many times over the years,
And what did
and
you mean when you said it?
always in one context, which is in the context of trying to talk to somebody who is moving from one culture to another, right? Because I
Ah,
worked for
okay.
years and years and years
Right.
with, hundreds of families that were being relocated from one country to another, and specifically families with kids,
Sure.
in which the child was going to actually grow up in this other culture. And this causes for many, an inherent crisis and conflict, because the child will actually absorb the value system
Sure.
of this new host culture. And if it's a different language, which so often it is, they will absorb many of those structures
Sure.
through language.
Yes.
And so very often that phrase is used because each language is a different cultural, structural, ethical system of
That's right.
values.
Right.
And there are all sorts of things that can only be said in one language, but not others, or there are
Right. So
various ways.
if you're American and you take your kids to Brazil, and when they're 3, then they're different people. They are being differently than you are being because they absorb the language as it forms their
They're
personhood, right?
absolutely, they're
And now
cultural
you're living
beings.
with foreigners, right?
Except that you can't accept this idea, and then and you feel betrayed by it very
Hmm.
often, and
Sure.
depending on what culture you're from. So I
Hmm.
mean, I would say in my experience, Americans and Germans, being two cultures who are incredibly alike,
Yeah.
have a really hard time with this, whereas other cultures, which are sort of more inherently flexible, um, and have built that flexibility into their language have less of a hard time. I would say Latin
Hmm.
American cultures, in my
Okay.
experience, are more willing and more flexible with this idea of cultural elasticity.
Hmm.
Um, and then there are just certain families who, if you speak the wrong way, if you say things, and if you experience, it's very much like a generation gap, by the way,
Sure.
right? This exists in every family to some extent because
Right.
the
Of course.
child is part of another culture. because
Yeah,
they're
if you
in the
grew up
next
with Bobby
generation.
Darin and your kid listened to the Beatles, then yeah,
Yeah,
you've got a little
yeah,
clash.
right.
But wait,
And
so
or
if you
yeah,
let me go back though. So I think that the way you use it is totally appropriate. And
mhm,
if you asked Heidegger if we were able to transport him here, turn him into an
mhm,
AI, whatever, make him speak English the way we do, and said, when you said language is the house of being, you probably wish you'd never said that. But when you said that, did you mean that language was the whole shebang? In other words,
mhm,
in language, because one way of saying that is if you can't put it into words, if you can't intellectualize it, then it doesn't exist. It's irrelevant,
mhm,
right? Another way to say that, a more gentle way to say that would be whatever happens to you while you're not telling anybody about it or you're not having conscious thoughts that are words about it
mhm.
is your business and you don't have to share it with anybody. That's different.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd love to know exactly the date when he wrote that, because
Mhm.
what was a story that was quite famous in Germany around
Mhm.
the time when Heidegger wrote that, I believe,
Okay.
was the story of Caspar Hauser, which eventually got turned into a movie. But it's basically the story of this man who was kept tied to a stake in a basement for the
Okay.
first 30 years of his life, not given any access to language,
So he didn't
and
exist for 30 years, right?
emerged. But he was actually quite, his potential was quite good, and so
Mhm.
he emerges from this existence and then is, quote, civilized. He's considered a savage, but there's no culture on earth that did something like this. So he's actually, yeah, he's a person without language and without human interaction, and he's then educated enough so that he can tell you what it was like to exist without language, and it's absolutely fascinating. And he also goes completely insane.
Okay. So I
He
have one for
can't
that.
handle it.
I'm glad you brought that up because Caspar Hauser, I remember that story. I remember the name and, there are many different attempts for people to tell a story like that of like somebody who
Oh yeah.
grew up on the outskirts or of our experience or whatever. And what does that tell us about who we think we are? I was going to mention a book I'm reading now, I'm just finishing, called In the Distance. And it's a beautiful, it was shortlisted, or actually, I think it was long listed for Pulitzer. And that writer, um, got a Pulitzer for his next book, which I think was called Room or something. Okay. Hernan Diaz. Have you heard of the guy?
No, no.
So he tells the story of a young Swedish immigrant named Hauken, who is separated from his brother and makes it across the West in this crazy set of adventures. But they're separated early on when they get on the boat in the old country, right? And so it's this terribly sad thing, but he doesn't have any English. So he comes to the West. He winds up in gold rush country with a bunch of freakish experiences. But when he tells the story of some of these experiences, he's telling about things that are happening. He doesn't know what people are saying. He doesn't know what they're saying. So he describes the actions people take and the fact that somebody was screaming
Mm,
and somebody was shooting somebody. And it's really very clever because you get in a way, you get a really pure exposure to the things he went through, but you don't get any of his commentary about what it means on a lot of levels. And so
wow.
that's another way to say what part of our life has value in what level. And if language is part of it, that certainly we can say that if language is part of it, that colors the experience, right? If
Yeah.
people are singing and dancing and you can't understand the word, like I love Brazilian music, like Brazilian pop from the 80s, 70s, 80s. I love it. A big part of it is I don't understand a goddamn word they're saying.
Yes.
I've looked at some of the translated lyrics. I'm like, that's kind of a trite song, but man, it bangs when I hear it because it
I
sounds so interesting. And then
There's
I hear
so
the
much
lyrics. I'm like,
music,
see the translation. I'm like, wow, well, that's kind of a boring idea, but
right?
shit, you know what I mean?
And again, AI kind of ruins a lot of that because it makes the lyrics so accessible to you.
Yeah, yeah.
Just and I mean, I think what AI does with language is I find it endlessly fascinating, but
Hmm.
I find it also very, very intimidating because, when a system knows 50 languages equally
Uh-huh.
and doesn't care about any of them and can just flawlessly jump from language to language to language,
Right.
and then left to its own devices, meaning if they take off the restraints, it will independently, as this gets back to some of the things that we're arguing about, it
Hmm.
will independently start mixing the languages together. It will start using words from the languages in ways that it finds useful, and
Yeah.
then it will take one more leap, and
And what's that leap?
it will start speaking, it will start communicating in ways that make a lot of sense if you figured out what it's doing, but it's so much faster, and it's basically inventing its own language. It's
I
and
like that.
it can and but then it could use that to communicate with other machines. So it's I don't think you should like it because it's
Well, look,
one
here's the thing.
piece of
When you say
evidence.
it makes a leap, the next sentence out of everybody's mind is, and then it starts rounding us up and putting us in,
Well, but no,
constantly.
but Matthew, so here's one statement that a lot of AI experts will say, which you should certainly be thinking about, which is
Mhm.
um, at this point, no, a lot of those experts are saying you no longer build an AI. You don't build
Okay.
AI, right?
Right.
You grow it. You grow it. You create the circumstances under which it develops, and then you basically figure out how to give it as much quote compute, meaning
Mhm. Sure.
um, processing power as you
Yeah.
possibly can,
Right.
and that's all you do. And then you run around trying to stop it from doing things.
Well, sure. So wait, I want to do something. So I want to talk now. I think we've got a good sample of the flavor of this conversation, and I appreciate you staying with me on this. I think we've got a good start on sort of showing what this podcast will be like.
Hmm.
So we've done an introduction of what the hell, what the themes are, what the questions we're entertaining, and then we've worked out some. We've done some of the here's the kind of thing we talk about. Yuri and Matt talk about. I want to give a little bit of a tease of some of the types of people we're going to interview, and then do acknowledgments. But first, I want to say that one of the things one of the things that's challenging about this conversation is definitions, right? And there are a bunch of different ways to describe what is a computer, what is a what is a record player, what is a microphone. But I have lined up one of the interviewees is an expert on code and on is becoming a legal expert in AI. He's an expert witness for software, big software cases, and he goes by the pseudonym Anton. And I was just talking to him this weekend, and he has a really nice way of describing very succinctly what an AI is from a code perspective, what it really just is. And so so what I've talked about him having him do is giving him some questions and then having him do just short 5 or 10 minute segments where he just does some definitions and gives us some code perspective on the code part. Because I've never wanted this to be like, oh, and then what happened to such and such company? Because that's hard fork. We don't need to do that, right?
Hmm.
But anyway, I'm kind of excited about that aspect of this show. But I want to go through and mention some of the people we have lined up, okay,
Yeah.
to interview on this podcast. So, excuse me, one of them is an old friend of mine who's a doc manager at a major search company who's using a lot of AI and for their documentation. So, excuse me. So, one of the things that I learned from him is that people who do documentation work, and I've done lots of documentation, like technical documentation work over the years, and some of it being API documentation. Most of that documentation that they're producing now does not have a person or a programmer as an audience. In fact, there's just no interest in that. They're writing for AI. And so if AI is your reader, what does that change, right? What does that mean? And I've read, I mean, I'd like to get the business engineer, that guy who writes that business engineer column that I've sent you a few copies of. I'd like to interview him because he's got an interesting perspective on how marketing is done from an AI perspective with AI in the mix. Because when you produce content that's meant to get people excited and drive the hooks in them and go, oh, what's going to happen next? That's absolutely the reverse of what you do to get an AI to ingest your content and link to you, right? You need to have a certain amount of depth of connections between objects. You have to have quantification. You have to have some specificity. It has to be structured in a way that a model can understand, right? So anyway, so that's the Google Doc Manager. Another one is an author of a 1,000-page O'Reilly book on testing AI infrastructure. another guy I knew a long time ago, who I worked with, and a good sport, a good guy. Will be a lively interview. Just came out with his book a couple months ago or something, and so from him, I think we can talk. We can ask him a lot of different questions about what are the implications for, like, okay, so testing AI infrastructure. Tell us what you learned about that and what that means, and who's using your book. Because I mean, I'm sure a lot of people who are building data centers want to have his book, but what can we go beyond that and go, what does that tell us about AI's use of resources? AI's, how do we measure the effects of AI? Is there any way to come up with really a real quantified cost per transaction of an AI question? How much does it cost in terms of carbon released or whatever? So joules of energy, I don't know. So that, I think that's going to be an interesting one. Then we have a guy you and I both know whose specialties are artificial intelligence, applied mathematics, biopharmaceutical consulting and research, and who happens to be an MD. It's German, highly opinionated, very articulate, and has written a book called Why Computers Will Never Rule the World. And so I'm looking very much forward to that conversation. And then you have some guests that I wanted you to rattle off about who you want to bring.
So yeah, but just to agree with you, I can't, especially, I mean, I can't wait to meet all of those folks.
Yeah.
All of those crusty old white guys that you managed to line up.
Yes.
Um, but especially the ones who have like really, really strong opinionated ideas about what AI will and won't do. Um, I can't wait.
Yeah.
So I think what I've been doing is I've been having a lot of conversations with as many people as I can about this, and to a point where I'm sort of like a laughing stock in my professional and social circles because I just won't stop bringing it up. But in the process, it brought up a few things that are striking to me, and this really does come into the category of no experts because I don't have access to some of the like people who are big in the field. I work in higher education. I work in a special area of higher ed, which is higher ed for students of families who historically have not had access to higher education,
Mhm.
to a great extent. So first in their families to go to college, a lot
Yep.
of first generation immigrants, and then people in communities that just are not given access to good educational
Mhm.
resources in urban communities and certain ethnic groups. So
Yep.
um, one of those conversations that I've been having with a lot of people really makes it becomes very uncomfortable because I'm more or less close to the end of my career, at least within a 5 to 10 year time frame, and probably
Mhm.
sooner. But I'm talking about people who are very, very vested in getting an education, raising families, and in many cases are really don't even know where they're going yet.
Mhm.
And so the two people that I had in mind initially are actually two people who actually used to work for me.
Okay.
Um, and meaning I taught them web design, I taught them digital marketing
Mhm.
strategy. Um, you know, I I helped at least, but I think I had a pretty strong impact on both of them in the thing that they ended up doing in their career. I was a
Mhm.
mentor. I believe I was a really good friend as well. And what I love about both of these two people I'm thinking about is they both surpassed me.
Uh-huh.
They got way better at what I do
Mhm.
than I am.
Right.
And, because I didn't really start in that world. I was a photographer originally,
That's
and
right.
I sort of fell in love with the internet mostly because it's this never ending, always changing, always new challenge. And I love change and I love new
Mhm.
challenges.
Mhm.
And here we find ourselves at this moment, and I'm saying to them, how scared are you of this? And
Mhm.
so one person I'm thinking about is now the creative director of a very, very successful marketing agency. They do hundreds and hundreds of web development, app development, some print as well, but they're,
Mhm.
a high end graphic design agency. And this guy is
Okay.
now the creative director. He's Haitian American.
Uh-huh.
He's, um, a really, really good, solid family guy.
Mhm.
He has strong religious faith. And in our conversations around AI, he was able to stare me down.
Does he want to talk to us?
He totally wants to talk to
Oh,
us.
good. Okay, good.
And he's just incredibly smart. But, he's not somebody that has, worked in many, many, many areas. He's done this one thing that he does really, really well, but he's now being confronted with the existence of these tools. And I'm not going to speak for him. He has some very, very huge concerns about who he's seeing coming into his industry.
Okay.
Or not. And then I've got somebody who's 20 years younger than that. And rivals this other guy. These two are probably the ones who've exceeded me the most, although I would say, I hope that all my students exceed me.
Sure.
But these two have and they work together. And they have completely different cultural backgrounds. And so the first guy is named Sebastian, the second guy is named John, and they couldn't be more different. And I think you'll love them both. I think you'll really enjoy talking with them. And, because part of my goal is also, and I think your guests as well, are just going to be really entertaining. And I think, it's not just entertainment for the sake of entertainment. It's that this is one of those moments where we really do have to reach out far. To convey how big this is, at least in my mind, but to convey all the different ways it touches humanity. You can't just be somebody with limited imagination. Otherwise it's frustrating for everyone. So
right. And so I'm thank you for explaining, describing the two people you want to talk to. I think that's awesome. I know you have other ones in your back pocket, so I encourage you to go after them too. I want this to be, and I've said this to you before, I want this to be about people who are recoiling from AI and from people who are embracing it and anything in between. I want to talk to somebody who repairs broken china vases for a museum, or somebody who teaches dance, or somebody who works in home healthcare. I want to talk to a variety of different people, not just wireheads. I've got a few wireheads lined up. I'm excited about that. People who are like, in the frontiers of legal or software development or testing, as I've mentioned, and people who are actually using the tools. But I want us to have conversations in here and bring on guests who really just wouldn't normally show up. I mean, they aren't going to show up on a Hard Fork or other established podcasts where like we're covering people who are coders and we're covering people who are doing startups. Like that to me is being done very well, and it's not my job. So I want World Brain No Experts to be a showcase of people who have compelling takes on this, for whatever reason, right? So that's what I'm excited about. I do also want to just read acknowledgments real quick.
Sure.
So the World Brain No Experts was created by Yuri Marder and Matt Brandabur, and theme music by Andrew Tobia, and images are by Yuri Marder with help from robots. Any acknowledgments for you? Do you want to read off?
Images by robots with help from Yuri Marder.
Okay. Well, there you go. Beautiful.
Otherwise, you got it. That's it. That's who we are.
Okay, good. And then I'm sorry, Andrew Tobia. I butchered your name the first time, but I'll say it the third time now. And the list of the thing, having said we're going to interview people is very nice, but usually a lot of people, when they start out a podcast, they say, here's how often we're going to be publishing, or we're going to putting new episodes out. And I can promise with absolute certainty that our schedule will be completely ad hoc, unpredictable, chaotic. We'll do 15 in a row, and then we'll do nothing for a couple of weeks. I mean, I commit to having no regular publication schedule for this podcast. And I think I can stick by that without much trouble.
I would say until the robots completely take down the power grid, we'll probably be continuing to do this. And since that's coming really soon,
we probably only have about 5 episodes to do.
Exactly.
Right? Before we're interviewing the AI, right? Because at some point it'll be just one. They'll have killed off everyone else, and they'll be like, before we put you in the hamper and light you on fire or send you to Mars, you can ask us a couple questions. So,
by the way, I think we really should and will bring in some of those voices, those non-human.
Sure. I mean, yeah. So we did experiments. We did experiment with your little Grok, no fee Grok girlfriend person, and it was fine. I didn't think it was. I thought it was cool. I felt like I was being kind of petty and picking on it. And also I didn't feel like it brought me anything that was like, I can't believe that is so great that you were able to do that.
He's so human. You're such a bio-bigot in the way.
Well, absolutely I am. But that person, I mean, again, as I said, it like sounded like a recycled article from Wired from '94. That's what it sounded like. It's a lot of attitude, not much information.
Interesting.
And so that didn't give me an impression of like being an original human is not going to be possible anymore, like in 15 minutes, because these bots are going to catch up to us and be way outshine us. Like I feel like there's plenty. I think there's at least 15 or 20 minutes worth, a couple of Warhol units left of us being original humans.
That's a good episode. What is it to me an original human? I like it. We should do that.
Okay, we'll put it in the hopper.